This is Duke University.
Today. I also want to very much thank panelists who are coming from various places around the U.S., some local, some Oregon, for coming in and joining us for a couple of days here at Duke. So I'm Lydia Olander. I'm the director of the Ecosystem Services Program at the Nicholas Institute. And this event today is something that's the Nicholas and the Nicholas Institute have coordinated through our Ecosystem Services Working Group. And we're going to be talking about environmental innovation and urban planning. And I was going to just very briefly give a couple slides that are background on kind of the setting of what's happening in cities these days.
If you go back one, we're trying to figure out what that is. Is that the walkway in New York City?
It's the New York walkway, yes. Yes, I was going to do this later. So half of the global population is living in urban areas, and according to the 2010 census, 4 out of 5 individuals in the U.S. are living in metropolitan areas. For the sake of time, I won't do this right now, but if people haven't done this yet, go to this UNICEF website. You can run from 1950 out to 2050 and look at the growth of cities and the percentage of people living in different cities. This is 2010. And you can see in the U.S., 255 million urban population, 82% urban. So you can see the scale of urbanization and the percentage of these different parts of the world that are urban. And it's impressive growth of these bubbles as you watch the timeline. The other thing we're grappling with here in the U.S. is degrading infrastructure. Water and sanitation infrastructure is falling into a state of disrepair. U.S. water infrastructure is leaking 6 billion gallons of fresh water per day, says the American Water Works Association. And EPA has estimates of minimum repair investment of $335 billion for fresh water, $298 billion for wastewater, and the American Water Works Association estimates are much higher than this. The other thing that's happening is a trend across cities is this growing interest in green infrastructure. I think green space has been an interest for a long time. And numerous benefits that are associated with these things: clean air and water, carbon sequestration, reduced heat, mental well-being, and physical activity are among the list. So all those kinds of good things that come with green stuff is a growing trend in the way cities are looking at things. So I just wanted to note one other thing as we're thinking about cities and ecosystem services. I think of ecosystem services largely as locally relevant things that people care about and value locally. So at a community level is the right place in many ways to think about some of these things: local air quality and shade and recreational opportunities. And so when we think about the role that these cities play in ecosystem services and how we manage them, it could be a very important role. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panel. We are going to have 3 speakers for the first panel, which is on environmental information and policy tools. Will Allen, who's with who's the Strategic Conservation, Director of Strategic Conservation and Planning with the Conservation Fund. He's going to be talking about GIS mapping and provision of ecosystem services. And then Jeff LeJava, who's Managing Director of Innovation at Pace Law School's Land Use Law Center. And he'll be speaking about transferable development rights. And then Bobby Cochran, who is with the Willamette Partnership in Oregon, and he'll be speaking about compliance and voluntary ecosystem service markets. Emily, switch slide.
While she's getting that set up, again, my name is Will Allen with the Conservation Fund, and I came all the way from Chapel Hill this morning to speak to you today. We have an office here in Chapel Hill. We're up to about 18 folks here, but we're actually a national nonprofit organization that's based just outside of Washington, D.C. And one of our core businesses is actually land and water conservation in terms of doing real estate acquisitions. So we've protected over 7 million acres since 1985. But we also have a unique dual charter with the IRS of environmental protection and economic development. And so we do a lot of projects that work on working landscapes, trying to come up with, figuring out ways to do environmental protection with an economic return. And so that's where this ecosystem service piece is very much part of our mission. I direct a program that we call strategic conservation planning, and it really just comes down to trying to find out, you have limited time, you have limited money, and you have limited, you just have a lot of constraints, and we just try and figure out what's the best bang for your buck to get the conservation mission outcome and the economic development. So our team is kind of planners, conservation scientists, and actually my colleague Jasmine Varela, who is a Nicholas School MEM grad, is in the back today. So she did a lot of the work on this Houston thing we're going to talk about. But we are, as I was mentioning earlier to some folks, we are an equal opportunity employer. We do have Duke, Carolina, and NC State grads in our office in Chapel Hill. Forestry School, Iowa City Regional Planning, UNC, and we've got a handful of Duke MEMs as well, and they're also sprinkled around the country. One of our major focuses has been on urban areas, and I'm going to talk specifically about Houston, but there is this Metropolitan Green Spaces Alliance. There's kind of a coalition of umbrella organizations that work in many of the largest metropolitan areas. And so the group in Houston is Houston Wilderness, is the NGO nonprofit that works on this. And there's also, we work with the Houston-Galveston Area Council, which is the metropolitan planning organization that does, in particular, transportation work. So the objectives of the ecosystem service work and also what we call green infrastructure work for this project was to allow for regional planning to be, have a good foundation in science and data, and to figure out how planning for gray infrastructure, like roads and other infrastructure networks, how that should also be in concert with these ecological networks. There was a related project that the Houston-Galveston Area Council did. There's these project called HUD Sustainability Grants. They have a regional planning project for a 13-county area to figure out where their growth and reinvestment scenarios could be, because there were projections of a couple of million people moving into that Houston area, so they wanted to understand the trade-offs between different development scenarios. So in a nutshell, what we did was we designed what's known as a green infrastructure network. And that's creating an interconnected network of lands that where really the whole is greater than the sum of its parts in terms of looking at the natural systems. We also did do some ecosystem service valuation, and then do something that we call an implementation quilt. That is, come up with the array of programs that can help make some of these areas a reality. So the map on the left there is the green infrastructure network, all these different types of building blocks, and I'll very quickly go through what that is. The Houston Wilderness also has kind of a regional aspirational plan for a green belt, and that's sort of superimposed on that map. And then this was just a composite map of some of the ecosystem service valuation that we did. And the map up here is, there was, in terms of those growth and reinvestment scenarios by the planning agency, they had a greener region scenario, and they asked survey questions to compare that against business as usual compared to other types of scenarios. So when we talk about green infrastructure, we talk about it in terms of multiple scales. There's lots of different types of activities that you can do at different scales. So down at that site scale, you have things, stormwater management, urban forestry, those types of things. In the next panel, you'll hear a little bit about Philadelphia, and that's a good example of some of those activities. There's also this kind of intermediate scale where you're dealing with regional trail networks, you're dealing with water supplies for areas, and then there's this landscape scale, kind of, I'll call it critter-centric activities, where you're looking at large blocks of unfragmented habitat that meet specific requirements. And you try and piece all of that together regionally. And so we have, for those of you who take the GIS and mapping classes here, we have specific GIS models that build these interconnected networks of cores, hubs, and corridors. So the map on the left there is what we came up with, and there's different types of systems that we did. It's not a land cover map, but what we did was we identified the largest intact blocks of upland forest, bottomland forest, prairie landscapes, tidal wetlands, non-tidal wetlands, streams, lakes, and floodplains, and then corridors that would connect those to maintain that interconnectivity that's useful for, obviously, migration of things, but then also climate change and adaptability for those types of things. There was an original mapping product done for an 8-county area that the Transportation Agency did for avoidance and minimization of transportation impacts. And they got the HUD grant, but then they didn't have the funding to expand and have a consistent map for their 13-county area. So we got private foundation dollars and matched against the HUD grant and did this project. So ecosystem services, this was just the diagram that was used by the local Houston Wilderness Organization, just in terms of ecological capital. I think most folks are familiar with these elements. So I'll cut to the chase and say that we did some valuation work related to water quality, air quality, water supply, stormwater regulation, and carbon sequestration. And then this map is kind of a composite of that. And I'll just quickly highlight that this area here is kind of a bottomland and wetland system in here, so that pops out quite a bit because there's a stacking of benefits associated with different types of ecological systems. What I'll highlight out of this whole exercise, and we have a huge technical report that goes into the details of this, is that the reason that we do the green infrastructure network mapping is that it is kind of this bang for the buck thing, that if you identify these interconnected networks of different types of land cover types and then put them into blocks and connect those, if you look at a variety of strategies to try and protect those areas, you're going to get most of the ecosystem service value if you work on that combination of different implementation strategies. So in the Houston case, the network in various degrees covered about 62% of the land area, but it had 91% of the ecosystem service benefit. And those types of multiples have been consistent across many different projects that we've done, where the network itself ranges anywhere from 30 to 50% of the land, but you're getting 70, 80, 90% of that value. So it's one way to try and get at what are those most important lands from an ecosystem service perspective. And you get the multiple benefits. So you might be protecting it for the ecosystem service value, but you also might be getting recreational benefits or other human-centric activities as well. So that was obviously very kind of a lightning round tour, but we have relatively short talks so that then we can have the discussion later. So I will leave it at that. Thanks.
So we're going to just go through the speakers and say questions and answers to the end.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I always have trouble standing behind the podium, so excuse me if I walk around a bit. Again, my name is Jeff LeJava. I'm Managing Director with the Land Use Law Center for Sustainable Development at Pace Law School. But I'm going to be talking about a particular land use strategy called Transferable Development Rights, and my experience with that tool when I served as the TDR Program Administrator and Staff Attorney for a regional land use agency in northern New Jersey called the Highlands Water Protection and Planning Council, or Highlands Council for short. It's important to understand kind of the context in which I was involved with the program development and implementation, so I just want to give you a little bit of background. The Highlands region of New Jersey is part of a larger 4-state region comprising about 3.5 million acres between the states of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. And despite what you might see on the opening sequence to The Sopranos, New Jersey, as particularly northwest New Jersey, is a very beautiful area of the state and of the Northeast. I could probably take any one of you and drop you in the middle of a riparian area, and you probably think you're in either farmland in Vermont or some forested, core forest areas up in the Great North Woods in Maine. The Highlands region is critically important for ensuring water quality and quantity for the 5.4 million people who rely on the drinking water. The Highlands region itself, which is approximately 860,000 acres in New Jersey, is only 17% of the state's land base. However, it provides 64% of the state's drinking water supply. So a critically important area and necessary to ensure its protection for the long-term sustainability of the metro New Jersey region, which is this area here. New York City is right here, and obviously a lot of development pressure has been occurring. So when you look at this, this GIF image here, beginning in about 1983, 1984, you started to see a significant amount of development pressure because of the region's proximity to New York City. For the most part, certainly along the eastern Highlands region, this area in here, where you see the greatest amount of development, land development change happening, you can be into Manhattan within an hour. In some cases, even 45 minutes if you catch an express commuter train. So throughout this period of the early 1980s through about 2005, 2004, significant development pressure occurring, a lot of sprawling suburban development, we like to call a lot of house farms were springing up throughout the region, and significantly stressing water quality for the entire region. So in response to this, in 2004, the state legislature adopted the Highlands Water Protection and Planning Act and created the Highlands Council, Highlands Water Protection and Planning Council, for whom I previously worked. It's a, again, 860,000 acre region. It's divided into two parts: the preservation area, approximately 415,000 acres, and the planning area. And the Highlands Council, under the Highlands Act, was charged with the development and implementation of a regional master plan. For those communities within the preservation area here, the green shaded area, they were required to conform their local master plans and land use regulations to the provisions of the regional master plan. Within the planning area, the yellow, that was completely voluntary. And so we have 88 municipalities across the 7-county region. 5 municipalities are totally located within the preservation area. Let's see, 36 entirely in the planning area, and then the remainder, the 47, are split between planning and preservation. And so for those communities that were split, they had to conform their local master plan and land use regulations for the preservation area portion of their communities. And the Highlands Council has been going through the conformance process now for the last 5 years, since the regional master plan was adopted in August of 2004 and became effective in September of 2008. So as part of the suite of tools that the Highlands Council was given authority to use, they were required to put in place a transferable development rights program for the Highlands region. Because of that development pressure, there's a lot of farmland in the Highlands region, a lot of forested area, and of course landowners were up in arms with the adoption of the Highlands Act, again in 2004. And so looking to a sister agency in southern New Jersey called the New Jersey Pinelands Commission. The Pinelands area in southern New Jersey is about 1 million acres, federally designated and state designated regional agency, has a regional master plan. The Highlands Council was modeled after the Pinelands. And the Pinelands put in place a transferable development rights program beginning in 1981. And over the course of time since that, they've protected over 60,000 acres through this land use mechanism called TDR. The Highlands Council, again looking at what had been done in the Pinelands, looked to create a similar program, except there's one significant difference. In the Pinelands region, the Pinelands Commission, again that regional land use authority, was given the authority to designate regional growth areas, areas where development should be occurring, and they could channel growth. The Highlands Council was not given that authority when the Highlands Act was created in 2004. And it was done for politically expedient purposes. The Republicans in the state legislature were not going to agree to allow growth to happen within the Highlands region unless it was voluntary. And so because of that, when I talk about the TDR transfer mechanism, all receiving zones in the Highlands region are voluntary. And that makes it very difficult. TDR, really in concept, is kind of easy to understand. There are areas that a community wants to protect. We'll call those sending zones. Either it could be for conservation reasons, it could be for historic preservation of historic properties, a number of different reasons, farmland preservation. And what happens is the development potential that remains on parcels within a sending zone are stripped off the land. The property owners, who in most cases usually volunteer to put development restrictions on a property, are given a credit as a proxy for that lost development potential. And then they're able to sell that development potential to property owners in what are called receiving zones, areas that have the necessary infrastructure capacity to support greater growth, usually at a density greater than what would otherwise be allowed under the zoning code. And so in the example here, you have parcel A with 5 development rights remaining with an existing house, and the receiving zone here obviously would just transfer to a similar parcel and area, and again, if it was within the same region, there wouldn't be any transfer. Under TDR, what happens is those 5 development rights are stripped off the land. The property owner is given credits, which they can then sell to a property owner or developer in a receiving zone, and the property owner is allowed to develop at a density greater than otherwise would have been permitted in exchange for paying for the right, paying for those credits to the property owner. So it's a private market conservation tool that has been used widely throughout the United States. There are over 350 programs nationwide. Many have been successful. Most of those are usually at the municipal level. There are a number of regional programs, but very few to date have been really successful. The Pinelands in southern New Jersey is probably the best example of a regional transfer program. So the TDR program, it's mandatory on the sending side. So this is kind of a hybrid. Property owners within the preservation area, through the adoption of the Highlands Act and the development restrictions that were put in place, were essentially downzoned. In some cases, you're allowed 1 septic system per 88 acres of forested land. And for a lot of property owners, that was a significant hit as far as they were concerned to their underlying property value. For farmers, often they say, look, our land is our 401k, and when you place development restrictions on the property, now you've taken that ability for me to strip off a parcel of land and sell it so that I can now pay for my kids to go to college. So the TDR mechanism was meant to balance the imposition of those development rights. But of course what made it difficult is that the receiving zones are completely voluntary. So from my experience in working with the Highlands Council and a number of stakeholders, there's 5 quick takeaways that I just want to impart this morning. And I'm sure I'll have a lot of other questions, and I apologize for having to fly through this. But often it's easy to identify those areas that a community or region wants to preserve. Right? There are the view sheds, the watersheds, significant farmland areas where you have a concentration of farms. But what becomes difficult is where then you're going to transfer that development to. The impacts for a community that's accepting development from outside of its borders or allowing greater development within its borders, right? There are tax implications. There's always the issue of generation of school-age children. And in New Jersey, because we have a state constitutional obligation to provide affordable housing opportunity, there was also the added burden for in the view of some municipalities that now they had to take on a greater number of affordable housing opportunities. And so that presented a problem. And so to date, 5 years after creation of the program, going into now 10 years since really the adoption of the Act, there's not a single receiving zone yet established. And so for the first 5 years, the program has functioned as a purchase of development rights program because we were able to get a capital infusion from the state of $10 million. And we used that money to go out and identify property owners that were kind of facing significant financial hardship due to the imposition of the Act. And so we had an initial purchase program, and the Highlands Council, and the Highlands Transferable, the Highlands Development Credit Bank, which the council created, has essentially now run out of funds. And so the council is desperately working to get those first receiving zones established, and it created a voluntary receiving zone feasibility grant program. We have 15 municipalities that are now undertaking feasibility studies. Now that I'm with the Land Use Law Center Pace Law School, we've actually been brought in to help them kind of augment the program along with a number of other project teams. So we'll see what ultimately comes out of it, and I hope it will be successful. But the fact that the receiving zones are voluntary is the greatest hurdle to this program. Developing a TDR market does not occur overnight. In the Pinelands, the program was established in 1981, and it wasn't until 1995 that they started to see any significant amount of transactions begin to occur. And it was really because the economy had kind of ramped up into high gear in that area of New Jersey, in the real estate market, that these transfers started to occur. At the outset, you're going to have a governmental agency play an active role in developing the market. So certainly the $10 million that the Highlands Council received from the state to kind of prime the market and go in and purchase Highlands development credits, that's what our TDR credits are called, the Highlands development credits from property owners that were facing significant financial difficulty, kind of served as an important pressure release valve for the initial phase of the program. And through that, with that $10 million, ultimately preserved about 750 acres. So when you think about it, not a significant amount of land preservation for a lot of money, but then again, real estate prices being what they are in New Jersey, you're looking at about $12,000 per acre on average across the region for purchase of those credits. In a regional context, again, the creation of voluntary receiving zones is extremely difficult due to the relocation and development impacts, unless the incentives are sufficient. Under the Highlands Act, those communities that agree to serve as receiving zones, if the receiving zone has a minimum residential density of 5 dwelling units per acre, are able to get up to $250,000 in enhanced planning grants. They get legal protection provided by the legal staff of the Highlands Council, and are given priority access to other state funds for infrastructure improvements. But again, to date, 5 years in to the TDR program, not a single receiving zone has been developed. And the last thing is stakeholder support is critical to program credibility. It was very important for the Highlands Council to bring in the New Jersey Farm Bureau as one of the primary stakeholders and to work in partnership with them in the development of the program, along with a number of environmental organizations, along with planning entities, municipal planning departments. And we brought all of these stakeholders together in the development of the program. We worked to push and get that initial $10 million capital infusion for funding for the initial purchase program. And that helped kind of at least prime the pump and get the program moving forward. So with that, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me here. Thanks for inviting me to come by. Sam Barrasso just graduated from Duke last year. Has been working for us. He all says hi. He wishes he could be here, but he was running around in Atlanta. So again, I'm Bobby with Willamette Partnership, and we're basically a nonprofit coalition that's dedicated to increasing the pace, scope, and effectiveness of conservation. And a long time ago, 2004, we realized that in order to really get done what we needed to do, we needed to have strategies that engage private landowners. And to engage private landowners, we couldn't really tell them what they needed to do. We needed to work on incentive-based approaches. And so that's what we've been doing since 2004, looking at ways to try and link approaches for water quality, habitat conservation, and other things in ways that essentially, if you look at all the hundreds of millions of dollars we spend on the environment every year because we have to or we want to, and what we try and do is kind of leverage the science, policy, and the people to take money from going to dumb stuff to better stuff. That's it in kind of a nutshell. So I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. But my board is made up of folks from business, local government, environmental groups, tribes, universities. So we have a broad representation. And the Willamette Partnership's our name, but we work now across the West. So we've got projects in Northern California, Alberta, Colorado, Washington, around water quality and habitat. I'll talk a little bit about the water quality piece. A lot of what we do is work in water quality trading under the Clean Water Act. And so basically, one of the examples that we talk a lot about is clean water services in the Tualatin River. This is Washington County, one of the fastest growing counties in Oregon, where Intel and Nike are. The wastewater utility there was faced with a new regulation that said the water coming out of the end of your pipe is too hot. Salmon don't like hot water. You need to cool it down. And you're either going to do that by building a $150 million refrigerator at the end of the pipe, would have been 100% sure to comply with the Clean Water Act, almost 100% sure to do nothing for fish. Fish don't need cold water everywhere. They need cold water fusion and habitat and other pieces. And the reason that the water is hot coming out of the end of the pipe is because we all take hot showers. And so Clean Water Services couldn't require people to take cold showers in the morning. So they were looking at a $150 million refrigerator. But instead they said that was dumb. And let's look at how we can restore 35 miles of riparian area to provide the same cooling benefits as a refrigerator would. And over the last 5 years, they've done that. And they've done it at a cost of about $6 million instead of $150 million. And so, you know, you showed the leaking water pipe. Most of this infrastructure was built in response to things like Cuyahoga River catching fire, and was built with large federal grants. Those federal grants are not there anymore. If you look at the overall rates for sewer and water, EPA says you can afford about 2% of your household income can go to wastewater rates, about 2% can go to drinking water. We're bumping up against a lot of those in a lot of communities in the country. And if you look at the problem in the Willamette River on temperature, 80% of the problem was coming from the fact that we used to pay farmers to cut down trees on riparian areas to grow crops. 16% is coming from our hot showers in the morning. So if we're spending $150 million on 16% of the problem, we're never going to get there. And so this was basically, we put the science that said, was able to quantify the temperature reductions of this, that linked it to that, and then put the business cases in place to be able to do this more often, and this is kind of the result. Clean Water Services looked at an urban park, an incised stream with turf grass going right down to the edge of the stream in 2004. In 2007, they re-meandered that stream and reconnected it back out to its floodplain, replanted it. That's what it looked like in 2010. So multiply that 35 times over. Now there's cutthroat trout, river otter, and they created a new problem for themselves. Now they have endangered mussels. But that's really good, an indicator of water quality. now they're trying to deal with, you know, basically freshwater mussels coming back up into the most urbanized stream in Washington County. And so a big part of what Willamette Partnership has done is to take that picture and figure out a way to standardize it so that Clean Water Services is a bit of a unique beast in Oregon. It has a restoration staff of 8 people and a regulatory affairs staff of 8 people. Most utilities in this country do not have that kind of capacity. And so we wanted to get something that would work for a city of Medford, a city of Klamath Falls, folks that had 4 guys running the wastewater facility, and their jobs were to buy chemicals, run the pipes, and, you know, get the wastewater out as fast as they could. When we talked to the city of Medford in Southern Oregon, they said, well, this sounds great, I love trees, but I don't want to plant them. I don't want to talk to farmers. How you guys go do that? And that's not what Willamette Partnership does. We kind of help set the rules of the game so people can play it. And so we put together a protocol and set of accounting procedures that allowed other folks to do what Clean Water Services did, bigger, better, faster. And we've worked with partners like the Freshwater Trust, who can then go to City Medford and say, look, Medford, I'll go plant your trees, I'll go work with farmers, and you don't have to pay me until I come to you with a credit that's been verified by Willamette Partnership with their stamp on it. And so City of Medford, if you look at those numbers, Clean Water Services, 150 million and 6 million. Medford was looking at the same thing, $16 million, but instead they're spending $8 million on riparian forest. City of Eugene is doing the same things. Port of St. Helens on the Columbia doing the same thing. So now we've built a system that can replicate itself over time. We've also built protocols that are working for lots of local governments and special districts in lots of areas around habitat and water quality. So we're working with Thurston County in South Puget Sound. Last month they had 2 new species listings on prairie habitat. In the next 5 years they're going to get 16 more. Fastest growing county in Puget Sound area, they were looking at a building moratorium. And so we basically helped them put together a habitat conservation plan that's built off of a lot of these same common accounting structures that allows development to happen, but also spins off enough funding to go after the 20 parcels that they need to get towards recovery of those 16 species. We're also working with local governments. Folks familiar with the National Flood Insurance Program? Okay. So we have litigation in Washington and Oregon that says FEMA did not consult with the Fish and Wild, for us it was NOAA Fisheries on salmon, and they lost that lawsuit because they didn't. And basically we're providing discounts for flood insurance for things that harm salmon habitat. And so they've gone back, and now local governments and how they deal with comprehensive planning or zoning decisions in their floodplains are going to have to totally redo how they do that. And so we're providing a lot of tools and measurement that says this is how you can go about protecting and enhancing floodplain and deal with redevelopment in your area. But there's some significant challenges that we're facing as we're trying to scale some of these approaches up. On the water quality side, we're hitting some really significant legal snags. We had a city that was getting ready to trade. They had poured a pad to build a refrigerator, but they said, I'm going to pull back off of that and go plant trees instead. We had comments come in from an environmental organization that said, no, agriculture is supposed to plant those trees. They have a legal requirement to do that. There's a difference of opinion on that, but essentially the city is now going to go and build a chiller. And we have other litigation on the underlying legal regulations, so the total maximum daily loads that are the basis for trading. That's basically pulling the rug out from underneath that kind of scaling curve that I was talking about earlier. And then the scale of implementation right is also really tricky. That a lot of what we're doing is working with local governments, but we're having to repeat a lot of the same conversations over and over and over again every time we go in and work with a new jurisdiction. And we're having a challenge figuring out how to fast track that. We understand everyone's going to need to kick something to feel like they own it, but if we could get that from 18 months to 6 months, that'd be a lot better. So we're trying to figure that out. And then a lot of this work on kind of payments for ecosystems and markets is based on this mythology that everything's so innovative. Not that I don't think what we do is all that innovative, particularly after you do it the first time. When you're doing it the 10th time, it's not innovative, just do it. But there's this culture and norms that are built around innovation that make it hard to push for consistency, which is where we're getting hit up a lot, is that there's inconsistency which breeds mistrust. And that's one of the big challenges. And then the fact that we just know nothing about these complex ecosystems. We can fool ourselves that we know some things. We can fool ourselves that we'll ever get there. The bar that we try and say is, can we be 100% sure that what we're going to do is better than the alternative? But that's only good for so long. At some point you got to say, no, that I'm getting towards best. And so how do you move that dial? And I think the opportunities that we have, as I think we've been able to make the business case on this. We've got the ways to deliver projects. We've got the ways to ensure accountability. We've started building the feedback loops and monitoring to get better adaptive management over time. And you're starting to see increasing calls for consistency, particularly on the folks who are buying and relying on these credits as part of their overall strategies. And so like on the water quality trading, we've just launched an effort to try and build some national best practices around water quality trading. Again, No one wants to call them standards because they're on this innovation side, but essentially that's what we're trying to do. So with that, I'll stop. I can talk to you more about some of these things, but there's a lot of interesting things in the works.